They are a mistake, a risk to my inheritance. The forest will take care of it. Mrs. Ilara, the cold-eyed millionaire widow, whispered as she abandoned the basket with the newborn twins in the icy heart of the forest. The tiny, fragile and sick infants cried a desperate lament that echoed in the dark and merciless night. Wrapped in thin blankets, their bodies trembled in the biting cold, when a gigantic, ghostly white shadow moved silently among the trees, drawn by the sound. And what approached them was not the death Ilara wished for, but something far wilder, purer, and unexpected. The gigantic, ghostly white shadow was not death, but a force of nature that moved with unusual curiosity. The majestic albino tiger, legendary for its solitary ferocity, stopped a few steps from the basket. Its piercing blue eyes, which usually radiated the coldness of an apex predator, now gazed at the tiny beings with a different intensity. The twins' cries, once a shrill wail, diminished to muffled sobs, as if the feline's imposing presence had, for an instant, silenced their despair. The tiger lowered its head, sniffing the icy air. The scent of humanity, of fragility, mingled with the aroma of the damp forest. Slowly, with surprising delicacy for its massive body, it moved closer. One of the babies extended a pale little hand from under the blanket, an unconscious gesture seeking warmth and comfort. The tiger did not retreat. Instead, in a movement that defied its wild nature, it lay down, curving its massive body around the basket. The warmth of its thick white fur began to envelop the little ones, protecting them from the biting cold that promised a fatal night. Its deep purrs, which once announced danger, now sounded like a primitive lullaby, a shield against the relentless darkness. As the miraculous scene unfolded under the faint moonlight, beginning to pierce through the treetops, a few kilometers away, two experienced hunters, João and Miguel, patrolled the forest. They were men of the land, accustomed to the sounds and silences of the wilderness, but something that night felt strange. A distant echo of a cry, almost inaudible, that didn't fit the usual sounds of nocturnal animals. João, the older and more skeptical, shook his head, attributing the sound to the wind or his imagination. Miguel, however, younger and with a heart more open to mysteries, insisted, "No, João, there's something out there, a sound that doesn't belong here." Cautiously, moving through the dense foliage, they followed the faint wail that now seemed closer. The icy air pricked their faces, and apprehension grew with each step. When they finally came upon a clearing, what they saw made them freeze. Their eyes, accustomed to unraveling the wilderness's secrets, couldn't process the image. There, nestled and majestic, was the legendary albino tiger, a creature they had only seen in legends and whispers. But what shocked them to their core was not the animal's presence, but what it was protecting, a small basket from which the now clearer sobs of babies emanated. João dropped his rifle, the muffled thud echoing in the broken silence. Miguel brought his hands to his mouth, his eyes wide, unable to utter a word. The tiger, alerted by the fall, raised its head, its blue eyes fixed on the men. There was no aggression in its gaze, only protective vigilance. The hunters, who had faced bears and wolves without flinching, felt an overwhelming wave of emotion. It was a miracle, a scene of pure compassion where the wildest nature bowed to protect the most fragile life. They knew, at that instant, that they had stumbled upon something extraordinary, a story that would change their lives and perhaps the fate of those abandoned little beings. The cold forest night, which Mrs. Ilara had hoped would be the end, had transformed into the stage for a new beginning, guarded by a wild and unexpected heart. João and Miguel's eyes met, a mix of astonishment and reverence filling the icy air. The tiger, its white fur gleaming under the moon, was a breathtaking sight, but the fragility of the babies in its care truly touched their souls. Miguel was the first to move, slowly, extending a hand in a gesture of peace, as if communicating with the majestic feline. The tiger, in turn, watched every movement, its piercing blue eyes showing no sign of aggression. It was as if it understood the urgency and purity of the men's intentions. João, regaining his voice, whispered, "Miguel, we need to get them out of here. They're so small, so helpless." The initial fear of approaching the predator gave way to an unwavering determination to protect those lives. With slow and measured steps, the two hunters approached the basket. The tiger, surprisingly, neither growled nor moved to attack. Instead, it raised its head and with a gentle, almost protective movement, moved slightly away from the basket, as if ceding its place to the humans, entrusting them with the care of the little ones. With his heart pounding in his chest, Miguel knelt beside the basket. The twins, wrapped in thin blankets, were pale and trembling, but their breathing, though weak, was steady. One of them opened its eyes for an instant, blue as clear as the tiger's that had guarded them, and Miguel felt a wave of tenderness wash over him. With the greatest delicacy he could muster, he lifted one of the babies, cradling it against his chest. The warmth of Miguel's body was an immediate relief for the tiny creature. João took the other, and the feeling of holding those fragile lives in their arms was something they would never forget. "Who would do such a thing?" João murmured, his voice choked with indignation. The image of the abandoned basket, the cruelty of the act, contrasted violently with the compassion of the wild animal. They knew it wasn't an accident. Those babies had been left to die. Anger began to boil in their hearts, but it was quickly replaced by the urgency of taking the twins to a safe place. With the babies carefully protected from the cold, the hunters began the long walk back to the town. The albino tiger watched them leave the clearing, an imposing and silent figure, its gaze following the little ones until they disappeared into the forest's darkness. It was a silent farewell, a promise that life, however fragile, would always find a protector. Meanwhile, many kilometers away, in the opulence of her mansion, Mrs. Ilara slept soundly. Her sleep was heavy, dreamless, without remorse. She believed her problem had been solved, that fate or nature would have played its part. She couldn't imagine that, at that very moment, the web of her cruel actions was being unraveled, and that the miracle in the forest would be the thread that would lead to her own ruin. Justice, often slow, was beginning to stir, driven by the innocence of the twins and the unexpected compassion of a wild heart. The night, which she had hoped would be one of oblivion, would in fact be the beginning of a revelation that would shake her entire world. The truth, like a mighty river, was on its way, ready to flood and reveal all her lies and the coldness of her heart. The walk back to the town was arduous and silent, punctuated only by the baby's tiny whimpers and the rustling of leaves beneath their feet. João and Miguel, their hearts heavy with the discovery and newfound responsibility, moved with an urgency that the forest's darkness seemed to try to delay. Each step was a challenge, but the sight of the pale little faces nestled in their arms gave them strength. Miguel, the younger one, felt a deep connection with those fragile beings. He held them with a delicacy he never imagined possessing, his gaze fixed on the tiny lips that every now and then moved in search of something they couldn't find. João, in turn, felt fury growing in his chest. Who could be capable of such cruelty? The image of the tiger, a wild predator, acting with more humanity than a human being itself, was a painful contrast that made him clench his fists. Finally, when the first rays of sun began to tint the sky a soft pink, they spotted the faint lights of the nearest small village. A sigh of relief escaped João's lips, heavy with exhaustion, but also with new hope. The priority was clear. The babies needed urgent medical care. They rushed to the only clinic in the place, a modest building with a small rusty sign. The on-duty nurse, an elderly woman with grey hair and tired eyes, was shocked to see them enter, two robust hunters carrying newborns. Her expression of surprise quickly turned to concern as she examined the little ones. "They have a high fever and are very dehydrated," she said, her voice choked by the gravity of the situation. "They need to be taken to the big city hospital immediately." While the nurse administered first aid with agile and experienced hands, João and Miguel told the unbelievable story: the abandonment in the forest, the albino tiger, the rescue. At first, she struggled to believe, shaking her head in disbelief, but the seriousness in their eyes and the fragility of the babies were undeniable. She knew that this was not just a medical case, but a heinous crime. She called the police and social services, ensuring that the twins would have the protection and care they deserved. Her voice, once tired, now carried unwavering firmness. The news of the miracle in the forest spread quickly through the small village, shocking and moving everyone. The image of a wild tiger protecting abandoned babies touched many hearts, transforming the story into a tale of unexpected hope and compassion. People gathered, whispering, their faces marked by admiration and indignation. As the twins were prepared for transport, wrapped in warmer blankets, João and Miguel felt a mix of exhaustion and a strange sense of purpose. They had been the instruments of a greater destiny, and the responsibility of ensuring that the truth came to light weighed on them like a silent oath. Far from there, in the isolated mansion, Mrs. Ilara awoke with the morning sunlight filtering through the silk curtains. A cold, satisfied smile played on her lips as she stretched in Egyptian sheets. The problem was solved, or so she thought as she savored her morning coffee, flipping through the pages of a fashion magazine without a care. Little did she know that the thread of justice was already being pulled, and that the story of the Tiger twins would soon reach everyone's ears, including hers. Ilara's world, built on ambition and cruelty, was about to crumble, and the miracle of the forest would be the catalyst. Her cold smile remained, oblivious to the storm forming on the horizon, driven by innocence and a truth that refused to be silenced. Mrs. Ilara, in her luxurious mansion, lived in a bubble of privilege and indifference. While the echoes of the miracle in the forest resonated throughout the country, she spent the morning in her immaculate routine, breakfast on the veranda overlooking the meticulously maintained garden, reading financial reports and a phone call to her lawyer, confirming that all the details of her inheritance were secured. Her gestures were precise, her voice calm and controlled, without a trace of concern on her face. The outside world, with its miseries and dramas, seemed to have no place in her carefully constructed reality. At the big city hospital, the reality was different. The twins, now affectionately called the Little Miracles by the staff, fought bravely. Their tiny hearts beat with surprising strength, and each improvement, however small, was celebrated with sighs of relief. Mrs. Lucia, the village nurse, refused to go home. She remained by the baby's side, her wrinkled hands caressing their feverish foreheads, her eyes brimming with hope and affection. João and Miguel were also there, sitting on uncomfortable chairs in the hallway, refusing to leave the hospital. With each medical bulletin, their faces lit up or contorted in apprehension. They felt that their mission wouldn't end until those little ones were completely safe and justice was served. The story of the twins and the albino tiger, however, had already transcended the borders of the village and the city. Major newspapers and national radio stations began to report on the case, transforming it into a phenomenon of public commotion. Detailed articles recounted the saga of the abandonment, the intervention of the majestic feline, and the rescue by the hunters. Photos of the babies, with their pale and vulnerable little faces, and artistic illustrations of the protective tiger filled the pages and screens. The indignation at the cruelty of the abandonment was overwhelming, but the admiration for the animal's compassion and human solidarity were even greater. Campaigns for donations of clothes, diapers, and money for the Tiger twins sprang up across the country, uniting people from different social classes and regions in a single purpose: to protect and support those innocent lives. At the mansion, Ilara was in her office reviewing documents when her housekeeper, Margarita, entered with the morning newspaper. "Madam, have you seen this news? It's absurd. How can anyone do such a thing?" exclaimed Margarita, pointing to the front page, where the photo of the twins and a striking headline about the forest miracle dominated. Ilara barely glanced at it. "Cheap sensationalism, Margarita. Don't waste your time with such nonsense." "There's work to be done," she replied, with a wave of her hand that dismissed not only the housekeeper, but also the news itself. She couldn't conceive that the story could have any connection to her. After all, her problem had been discarded in the darkness of the forest, far from curious eyes. But Ilara's world, once so impenetrable, began to feel the first tremors. The detective, pressured by the media and public opinion, intensified the investigation. Every detail of João and Miguel's testimony was analyzed. Every clue, however small, was rigorously followed. The network of solidarity around the babies grew exponentially, and the search for the biological parents, or more precisely, the person who abandoned them, became a national priority. The truth, which Ilara believed she had buried in the forest, was now in broad daylight, gaining voice and strength through millions of hearts, and approached her like an inevitable wave, ready to wash away her facade of perfection and reveal the cruelty she so painstakingly tried to hide. The wave of truth, which Ilara stubbornly ignored, began to manifest in uncomfortable ways. The next day, as she was having her afternoon tea, the phone rang. It was Cecilia, her socialite friend, her voice laden with gossip and indignation. "Ilara, have you seen the news? Those babies. And a tiger. It's heartbreaking. The whole country is talking." Ilara, impatient, tried to change the subject, but Cecilia insisted. "They're asking for donations. The association is organizing an event. You should participate. Set a good example." The idea of getting involved with commoners was repulsive to Ilara, who ended the call quickly, feeling irritated. At the hospital, the little miracles, as they were affectionately called, showed signs of improvement. The fever was decreasing, and their hearts beat with a stronger rhythm. Mrs. Lucia, with eyes full of affection, watched every movement. "They are fighters," she whispered to João and Miguel, who were still keeping vigil in the hallway, their faces marked by hope. The medical team, inspired by the baby's resilience, redoubled its efforts, feeling that they were saving not just lives, but a symbol of hope. Meanwhile, the investigation advanced seriously. The detective had sent a forensic team to the forest clearing. The abandonment site was meticulously examined. There were no clear human footprints, but the team found a small piece of fabric detached from the baby's blanket. It was a tiny, almost imperceptible fragment, but its edge had a delicate embroidery, an almost faded monogram, which appeared to be the initials EV. The discovery was a ray of light amidst the darkness of uncertainty. The detective held the fragment with tweezers. "This isn't common embroidery," he murmured. "It looks like haute couture artisan work." The team began to trace luxury ateliers, seeking to identify the origin of the monogram. With each call, the list of owners dwindled, pointing to an exclusive social circle. The truth, once diffuse, began to take shape, like a puzzle whose pieces slowly fit together. At the mansion, Ilara tried to ignore the growing buzz. She turned on the television for a cooking show, but the news about the Tiger twins broke in an urgent bulletin. The image of the babies and the illustration of the albino tiger filled the screen. Ilara, with a start, grabbed the remote, but the reporter's voice held her captive. "Police are intensifying the search for those responsible for the abandonment. A new clue, a fabric fragment with an exclusive monogram. may be about to reveal the identity of the person who committed this heinous act. Ilara's heart skipped a beat, a dull thud against her ribs. Monogram? Exclusive? She remembered the silk blanket, embroidered with her initials, that she had used to wrap the babies. An icy shiver ran down her spine, and her hands trembled visibly. Her dry lips moved in an inaudible murmur, and the teacup rattled, threatening to fall. The cold smile vanished completely, replaced by an expression of growing panic and despair. The world she believed she controlled was crumbling around her. The bubble of indifference had burst, and the cruel reality of her actions hit her with overwhelming force. The turning point had arrived, and there was no longer any escape. Ilara's panic transformed into a wave of nausea. The teacup fell from her trembling hands, shattering on the marble floor with a dry sound that echoed in her mind. "No, it can't be," she murmured, her eyes fixed on the television screen, where the enlarged image of the monogram seemed to mock her. It was unmistakable, her initials, that exclusive embroidery, custom-made by an Italian artisan for the finest linens in her home. She staggered, feeling the air thin in her lungs, and clung to the table to keep from falling. The world, once so safe and predictable, was crumbling into pieces around her. With her hands still trembling, Ilara picked up the phone, dialing the number of her lawyer, Dr. Beatrice. Her voice, usually calm and calculating, now sounded hoarse, almost unrecognizable. "Beatrice, you need to come now. It's urgent, a problem, a terrible problem." On the other end of the line, the lawyer, accustomed to her client's dramas, noticed the unusual gravity in Ilara's voice. There was a silence, and then Beatrice promised to arrive in less than an hour. Ilara hung up, feeling a glacial cold in the pit of her stomach. The facade of indifference she had maintained for so long began to crack, revealing the terrified woman behind the mask of coldness. At the hospital, the atmosphere was one of cautious hope. The little miracles showed remarkable recovery. The fever had subsided, and their hearts beat with a strength that surprised everyone. Mrs. Lucia, the village nurse, didn't hide the smile on her wrinkled face. She held one of the baby's tiny hands, feeling the slight pressure of its fingers, a sign of life that filled her with joy. "They're going to be fine," she whispered to João and Miguel, who watched from the door of the neonatal ICU, their eyes brimming with emotion. Each day, the connection between the hunters and the twins deepened, transforming them into dedicated guardians. The detective, in turn, wasted no time. With the clue of the EV monogram, he and his team traced the haute couture atelier that had made the blankets. The owner, an elegant and discreet lady, confirmed that only one particular client ordered pieces with that specific embroidery, Mrs. Ilara Vasconcelos. The name echoed in the interrogation room. Heavy with implications, the detective felt a chill. The millionaire widow, known for her impeccable reputation and invaluable fortune, was now the main suspect in a heinous crime. Initial disbelief was replaced by an iron determination to uncover the truth. The news of Mrs. Ilara's possible connection to the twins' abandonment began to leak, transforming the buzz into a national outcry. Journalists crowded at the hospital door, seeking any information. The story of the Tiger twins, once a tale of miracle, now became a scandal of epic proportions, promising to shake the foundations of society. Justice, which Ilara believed she had avoided, was now knocking at her door, driven by the innocence of the babies and the compassion of a wild animal that refused to allow cruelty to prevail. The net was closing in, and Ilara, in her mansion, felt the weight of the approaching truth more and more, ready to unmask her before the world. The wave of panic that hit Mrs. Ilara was a tsunami of fear and guilt she never imagined feeling. Dr. Beatrice arrived in record time, finding Ilara pale, sitting in a silk armchair, her hands gripping the arms of the furniture so tightly that her knuckles were white. Her eyes, once dominant, now shone with a terrifying vulnerability. "Beatrice, they know. The monogram. It's mine," whispered Ilara, her voice a mere thread. The lawyer, a woman with a serious demeanor and impeccable posture, sat in front of her client, observing her with a mix of concern and professionalism. "Ilara, I need you to tell me everything without omitting details. The situation is serious, but we can still devise a strategy." Ilara, between suppressed sobs, began to recount the events of that fateful night, her voice choked with shame and the terror of being unmasked. Nervous gestures, the tremor in her lips, all betrayed the despair that consumed her. The mask of coldness had finally fallen, revealing the fragile woman behind the image of power. While the mansion was the scene of an agonizing confession, at the hospital, life flourished with inspiring resilience. The little miracles, as they were called by everyone, had overcome the most critical phase. Their eyes, once clouded by fever, now opened more frequently, exploring the world with innocent curiosity. One of them, the boy, let out a small sigh, and Mrs. Lucia, who held him with affection, felt her heart warm. "Look, João Miguel, he's feeling us," she exclaimed with a wide smile, her eyes brimming with joy. João and Miguel, who didn't leave the hospital, watched the scene with deep emotion. They had become paternal figures for the babies, changing diapers, cradling them carefully, and whispering words of affection. The human connection forming there between the experienced nurse and the two rough hunters was a testament to the power of altruism. The news of the twins' recovery and the revelation of the EV monogram as the main clue had ignited the media. The front of the hospital was taken over by journalists and curious onlookers, all eager for more information. The story, once a local miracle, had transformed into a national phenomenon, a cry for justice and a symbol of the compassion that could arise in the most unexpected places. The police, with confirmation of the embroidery's origin, prepared for the next steps. The detective, with a grave demeanor, reviewed the documents. The connection between Mrs. Ilara and the abandonment of the babies was almost undeniable. Society, once an admirer of the millionaire, now divided between disbelief and indignation. Ilara's image, built with such care, crumbled under the weight of the truth. Justice, which sometimes seemed blind, now had wide-open eyes, guided by the innocence of two small lives and the silent roar of a wild guardian. The net was complete, and there was no longer any escape. Ilara, her voice choked by the confession, felt the weight of every word spoken to Dr. Beatrice. The lawyer, her brow furrowed in deep concentration, listened attentively, her eyes fixed on her client, assessing every nuance of her despair. "Ilara, the situation is delicate and the monogram evidence is unquestionable. Public pressure is immense, and the media is already in a frenzy. We need to be transparent, cooperate fully with the authorities, and above all, demonstrate genuine and profound remorse," advised Beatrice, her voice firm, but with a touch of compassion Ilara didn't expect. Ilara merely nodded, tears streaming down her pale face, a river that had long been dammed, now flowing freely. Pride and arrogance, which had shielded her for years against any true emotion, now shattered into pieces, revealing a fragility she herself was unaware of. She was no longer the unshakable millionaire, but a frightened woman, confronted with the magnitude of her cruelty and deeply regretful of her choices. At the hospital, joy was palpable, a vibrant contrast to the storm brewing in the mansion. The little miracles were, finally, out of danger. The medical team confirmed that although they still needed continuous care and monitoring, their recovery was a testament to their incredible strength and will to live. Mrs. Lucia, with a lump in her throat and eyes brimming with gratitude, watched the babies sleeping peacefully in their cribs, a soft maternal smile on her wrinkled lips. João and Miguel, sitting side by side in the hallway, felt a profound relief and a peace that warmed their hearts. Their mission, which began with the shocking discovery in the forest, was transforming into a journey of love, protection, and an unwavering commitment to the twins' well-being. They spoke softly about the little one's future, about how the entire community was mobilizing to ensure they had everything they needed to grow up in a home of love and hope. Meanwhile, the news of Mrs. Ilara's identification as the main suspect exploded in the news. Television stations interrupted programming for urgent flashes, and newspapers printed extra editions with impactful headlines. The image of Ilara's mansion, once a symbol of opulence and power, was now associated with the coldest and most unthinkable cruelty. Society, which once admired and envied her, now condemned her with overwhelming vehemence. Social media buzzed with messages of indignation, calls for justice, and a wave of solidarity for the babies. The detective, with the judicial order in hand, prepared the team to head to the mansion. The truth, which Ilara tried to bury under the darkness of the forest and the coldness of her heart, would now confront her head-on a public and relentless stage where there would be no more hiding place for her actions. Ilara felt an icy shiver run down her spine when the intercom rang. It was the doorman, his voice tense and hesitant, informing her of the police's arrival. She looked at Beatrice, her eyes wide with terror and despair. The lawyer, with a heavy sigh, stood up, her posture conveying unwavering seriousness. "The time has come, Ilara. Face the consequences with dignity and accept responsibility for your actions. It's the only way now to begin rebuilding something, however small." Ilara closed her eyes, feeling the weight of the world on her shoulders, an overwhelming burden of guilt and fear. The distant sound of sirens approached, growing louder and louder, announcing the end of an era of impunity and the beginning of a new phase, where compassion and justice, personified in the innocence of the twins and the protection of the albino tiger, would finally prevail. The truth, like a mighty river, was about to flood and reveal all her lies, and the coldness of her heart would be exposed to daylight, without filters or disguises. The sound of sirens, once distant, now tore through the mansion's quiet, approaching like a funeral dirge for the life Ilara knew. The massive oak door opened, and the imposing figure of the detective, accompanied by 2 officers, filled the threshold. Ilara's eyes, once so full of disdain for the world, now widened in terror, fixed on the badges that gleamed under the chandelier's light. Dr. Beatrice, with impressive calm, intervened, extending her hand to greet the detective. "Good evening, detective. My client is at your disposal. We understand the gravity of the situation and are ready to cooperate." Her voice, though firm, carried a tone of seriousness that didn't go unnoticed. Ilara, sitting in the armchair, looked like a wax statue, pale and lifeless. Her lips trembled, and she could barely breathe. The detective, with a penetrating gaze, addressed her. "Mrs. Ilara Vasconcelos, we have some questions about the abandonment of 2 newborn babies in the forest. The evidence we found leads us to you." He held a transparent plastic bag, inside which the small fabric fragment with the EV monogram was visible, a silent and irrefutable piece of evidence. Ilara looked away, unable to face the materialized truth. A solitary tear ran down her face, a sign that the wall of ice in her heart was finally beginning to melt under the heat of imminent justice. While the mansion was the scene of a silent drama, at the hospital, life celebrated its victory. The twins, now with provisional names of Hope, Sul and Estrella, affectionately given by the nursing staff, were stronger every day. Their tiny lungs filled with air without difficulty, and their hearts beat at a steady and healthy rhythm. Mrs. Lucia, with a smile that lit up her entire wrinkled face, held one of the babies, gently rocking him as he nursed vigorously. "Just look at them, my angels, so full of life," she said, her voice choked with emotion, to João and Miguel. The two hunters, who had become essential figures in the little ones' lives, watched with a tenderness they never imagined feeling. Miguel, the quieter of the two, extended a finger for one of the babies to grasp, and a small smile bloomed on his lips, a gesture that revealed the deep connection that had formed. João, his eyes shining, promised, "They will never be alone again. We will be here always." The medical team, witness to so many miracles, felt honored to be part of that journey of overcoming. The news of Mrs. Ilara's detention, though not yet official, was already spreading like wildfire. The front of the mansion was now crowded with news vans and curious onlookers, all eager for a glimpse of the millionaire who had fallen from grace. Ilara's image, once synonymous with power and refinement, was now stained by cruelty. Social media exploded in a mix of shock and satisfaction, with many clamoring for severe justice, but others, with more compassionate voices, asking that the baby's story be the true focus. The detective, after a brief conversation with Dr. Beatrice, informed Ilara that she would be taken to the police station to give a formal statement. As she stood up, her legs wavered, and she had to lean on the lawyer. Her eyes swept the room, as if searching for a last remnant of her old life, but found only the reflection of her own ruin. The image of the albino tiger, protector of the innocent, seemed to hover in her mind, a constant reminder that compassion had triumphed where evil had failed. She felt a lump in her throat, a mix of fear and a belated regret that was beginning to pierce her soul. The journey to justice was just beginning, and Ilara knew the path would be long and painful. But perhaps, just perhaps, it was the beginning of a transformation she never sought, but which fate imposed upon her with overwhelming force. The truth, exposed to daylight, would not be content with merely condemning her, but would force her to confront herself, the woman she had become, and the possibility of redemption that, however unlikely it seemed, began to whisper in her hardened heart. Ilara was escorted to the police station, each step a heavy burden that her designer shoes could barely bear. The air in the place was dense, laden with a seriousness that contrasted cruelly with the expensive perfume she wore. Sitting in a cold, impersonal interrogation room, the metal table seemed like an abyss between her and the detective. Dr. Beatrice, by her side, maintained a defensive posture, but Ilara's eyes were fixed on the detective, who was now reviewing the documents with a grave expression. He looked up, and his voice, though calm, sounded like thunder in Ilara's ears. "Mrs. Ilara, the evidence is compelling. The testimony of the atelier owner, the blanket fragment. Everything points to you." Ilara felt a lump in her throat, her hands clenching in her lap. The image of the monogram, once a symbol of her status, was now the mark of her shame. She tried to speak, but the words were lost in an inaudible murmur. Panic, once a wave, was now a turbulent sea that swallowed her, threatening to drown her in her own guilt. Meanwhile, outside, the world exploded. The news of Mrs. Ilara Vasconcelos's detention was the headline on all television channels, news portals, and social media. Broadcasters interrupted programming for urgent flashes. The image of her mansion, once an icon of luxury, was now displayed alongside photos of the tiny twins, creating a shocking contrast that inflamed public opinion. Social commentators and legal experts debated the case fervently, most vehemently condemning the cruelty of the act. Society, which once idolized and envied her, now viewed her with disdain and indignation. Long-time friends, once solicitous and present at her events, now shied away, fearing their names would be associated with the scandal that shook the foundations of high society. Ilara's reputation, built over decades with such care and artifice, crumbled in a matter of hours, like a house of cards swept away by a merciless gale. Beatrice's phone wouldn't stop ringing with requests for interviews and statements, but she ignored them, focused on her client. Far from the media storm, at the hospital, a ray of sunshine radiated hope. Saul and Estrella, the little miracles, were transferred to a common room where they could receive visits. Mrs. Lucia, her face lit by a tender smile, cradled Estrella, who slept deeply in her arms, breathing softly. Saul, the boy, was in the crib next to her, his small eyes open, observing the movement around him with serene and innocent curiosity. João and Miguel, sitting in armchairs nearby, looked at the babies with touching devotion, their hearts filled with a love they never imagined feeling. Miguel, the more reserved one, extended a finger, and Saul grasped it with surprising strength, making him smile, a rare and precious gesture. "They are proof that love always finds a way, aren't they, Lucia?" said João, his voice choked with emotion and gratitude. Mrs. Lucia nodded, a silent tear running down her wrinkled face, a testament to the joy she felt. The community, mobilized by this story of overcoming, sent donations, clothes and toys, creating a support network that enveloped the twins in a warm and protective embrace. The room was filled with flowers and cards, each expressing affection and the joy for the life that flourished there, an oasis of kindness amidst the turbulence. Back at the police station, Ilara felt the weight of it all. It wasn't just the fear of prison or the loss of her fortune. It was something deeper, a pain that pierced her hardened soul. The image of the babies, which she had tried to erase from her mind, now projected with painful clarity. Their crying in the forest, the fragility of their beating hearts. For the first time in years, Ilara felt a pang of genuine remorse, a pain that wasn't selfish, but born from the understanding of the cruelty of her act. Her eyes filled with tears, not of panic, but of a bitter and profound sadness. She looked at Beatrice, and in her voice, now more a whisper than a tone, there was a vulnerability never before seen. I abandoned them, in the forest, sick." The confession, public and painful, was the climax of her downfall, but also the first step, perhaps towards a redemption that seemed impossible. The detective observed the change in her demeanor, the mask of coldness finally undone, revealing the broken woman behind. Justice, which she had mocked, now confronted her not only with the law, but with the truth of her own heart. The silent roar of the tiger, which had protected the innocent, echoed in her mind, a reminder of the power of compassion she had denied, and which now haunted her like a ghost. Ilara's confession hung in the dense air of the room, a heavy silence that seemed to absorb the very light. The detective, with a gaze that mixed seriousness and a hint of relief, nodded slowly. Dr. Beatrice placed a hand on Ilara's shoulder, a silent gesture of support that the millionaire, in her newfound fragility, accepted without resistance. There were no more defenses, only the rawness of truth. Ilara felt an emptiness in her chest, but also, to her own surprise, a strange relief. The mask had fallen, and with it, the burden of sustaining such a cruel lie. She knew that the path ahead would be arduous, full of legal and moral challenges, but for the first time in a long time, she didn't feel the icy loneliness that accompanied her. There was a glimpse of humanity, of responsibility, beginning to sprout in her once hardened heart. The next day, the news of Mrs. Ilara's confession resonated even stronger than that of her detention. Society, once divided between disbelief and indignation, now felt a wave of shock and, for many, a bittersweet satisfaction. Justice, which seemed so distant for the powerful, was showing its impartial face. The case of the Tiger twins had become a landmark, a reminder that compassion and truth always find their way. Ilara, in her provisional cell, read the newspapers that Dr. Beatrice brought her, watching her image publicly crumble. The headlines were merciless, but she no longer felt the anger from before, only a deep weariness and a resigned acceptance of her fate. While the storm raged over Ilara at the hospital, the sun shone for Sul and Estrella. The babies were growing, gaining weight, and showing signs of vibrant personalities. Sul, the boy, was more restless, with a curious gaze that explored everything. Estrella, the girl, was more serene, with a smile that melted hearts. Mrs. Lucia, João, and Miguel were constant figures beside the cribs, their faces radiating unconditional love. The medical team confirmed that the twins were ready for discharge, and the adoption process, accelerated by national commotion, was in its final stages. João and Miguel, with the support of the community and the guidance of social workers, had applied for adoption. At first, the idea of two rough hunters becoming parents seemed unusual, but the love and dedication they showed for the babies overcame any prejudice. They had transformed João's small house into a welcoming home, with new cribs, toys, and clothes donated by people from all over the country. The entire village was celebrating, preparing to definitively welcome their little miracles. The family, which Ilara tried to destroy, was forming in an unexpected and powerful way, built on the foundations of altruism and human connection. The detective, satisfied with the progress of the case, closely followed the twins' recovery and the adoption process. He knew that the story of Saul and Estrella, protected by an albino tiger and embraced by a community, would be told for generations. It was a testament to justice that at times manifests in extraordinary ways. Ilara, in her seclusion, began to reflect on the life she had led. Unbridled ambition, the cold heart, the incessant pursuit of power and status. Everything seemed empty now. She remembered the detective's gaze, Beatrice's hand, and the silent roar of the tiger, which now didn't haunt her, but reminded her of the compassion she had denied herself and others. The resolution of the main conflicts was unfolding. Ilara would face the consequences of her actions, not only legally, but in a painful confrontation with her own conscience, opening a crack for the possibility of true remorse and internal transformation. The twins, in turn, would find a loving and safe home, where they would be raised with all the affection and attention they deserved. Their story, a beacon of hope, would inspire everyone, showing that even in the darkest moments, the light of kindness and solidarity can prevail, and that family, in its purest essence, can arise from the most improbable bonds. The albino tiger, the silent guardian, would remain as the eternal symbol of this truth, a reminder of the strength of life and love that transcends all barriers. In the seclusion of her cell, Mrs. Ilara no longer felt the fury or despair that had consumed her. There was a strange quietness in her spirit, an acceptance that stemmed from the understanding of her mistakes. She read the newspapers, saw her image disfigured by the truth, but the pain was different now. It wasn't the pain of wounded pride, but that of genuine remorse, which, however belated, began to heal the wounds of her own soul. She knew that justice would take its course, and that the consequences of her actions would be heavy. However, for the first time in a long time, Ilara felt a glimpse of peace, a peace born of truth and the courage to finally face the woman she had become. Her eyes, once so cold, now carried a reflective melancholy, a sign that the ice in her heart had finally yielded. While Ilara faced her destiny, in the village, life celebrated a new beginning. The day of Saul and Estrella's discharge from the hospital was awaited with contagious anticipation. Joanne's small house, once a simple hunter's refuge, had been transformed into a vibrant and welcoming home. The walls, once rustic, now displayed soft colors and children's drawings. New cribs, filled with soft blankets and toys donated by the entire community, awaited the little miracles. Mrs. Lucia, with wrinkled but energetic hands, supervised the final preparations, her smile lighting up the room. João and Miguel, with a tenderness that surprised everyone, arranged the final details, their hearts overflowing with pure joy and an unconditional love they never imagined feeling. The arrival of the twins was a festive event. Cars adorned with colorful ribbons and balloons waited at the hospital door. The medical and nursing staff, emotional, handed the babies to their new parents. João, with Sol nestled in his arms, and Miguel, holding Estrella with impressive care, felt a deep and unbreakable connection. Mrs. Lucia, with tears in her eyes, walked beside them, her face radiant. The small procession, accompanied by neighbors and friends, headed to the house, where a warm reception awaited them. The bountiful table, tight hugs, gazes full of affection, all of this wove a new tapestry of family, built not by blood, but by kindness, altruism, and the strength of human connection. Saul and Estrella grew up surrounded by a love that overflowed from every corner. The story of their rescue by the majestic albino tiger and the courage of João and Miguel was told and retold, becoming a living legend in the village. The tiger, once feared, was now revered as a guardian, a symbol of the compassion that can flourish even in the wildest and most unexpected places. Its image, reproduced in sculptures and paintings, adorned squares and homes, reminding everyone that life always finds a way, and that kindness, however unlikely it may seem, can change destinies. The story of the Tiger Twins became a beacon of hope, a testament that justice, overcoming adversity, and true love can triumph over cruelty. Ilara, on her journey of redemption, found a purpose in helping others, dedicating what remained of her fortune to social causes, an effort to rewrite her legacy. Life, indeed, took its course, and the years unfolded with the smoothness of a river finding its bed, weaving new colors into the tapestry of intertwined destinies. Mrs. Ilara, far from the spotlight and the opulence that once defined her existence, found a new and unexpected purpose in her seclusion. Her days were now filled not with board meetings or grand social events, but with the careful planning of social projects, funded with the portion of her fortune that was not confiscated. She had established a foundation dedicated to vulnerable children and wildlife protection, a silent and powerful echo of the majestic tiger that had changed the course of her life. Her eyes, once hard and calculating, now carried a depth of compassion that surprised the few who still had contact with her. She visited orphanages, sat with the children, and listened to their stories with genuine attention, something she would never have done in her previous life. In every smile she received, in every tight hug from a child, Ilara felt a piece of the ice in her heart melt, replaced by a warm and at times painful gratitude. She knew she would never completely forgive herself, but she found a path to redemption through service and giving. In the village, Saul and Estrella flourished, transforming João and Miguel's small house into a home filled with laughter, games, and a contagious light. They were now 5 years old, with curious eyes that mirrored the sky and honey-colored hair that danced in the sun. Saul, the boy, was a born adventurer, always exploring the surroundings of the house, with the same vibrant energy that characterized him since he was a baby. His little feet never stopped, always in search of new discoveries. Estrella, in turn, was the gentle soul, with a sweet smile that melted hearts and a fertile imagination, who loved to draw and tell stories, often to the family's pets. Mrs. Lucia, with her snow-white hair and ancestral wisdom, was the loving grandmother who told them the legends of the forest, including that of the majestic albino tiger, their silent guardian. She taught them about respect for nature and the importance of kindness, values that João and Miguel reinforced every day with simple, affectionate gestures. João and Miguel, the hunters transformed into fathers, had found a happiness that surpassed all their expectations. Their faces, once marked by the arduous life in the forest, now displayed lines of affection, patience, and unwavering love. João, with his deep and comforting voice, read stories to the twins before bed, while Miguel, the quieter one but with skillful hands, taught them to carve small wooden animals, a talent he had discovered and perfected. The entire community supported them, celebrating every milestone in the little ones' lives. The village school, once almost empty, now had the joy of the twins and other children who joined them, a sign that life was renewing and flourishing in every corner. The story of the albino tiger, the guardian of the innocent, was not just a legend, but a living truth that shaped the village's identity. A statue of the feline, masterfully sculpted by a local artist, adorned the main square, a constant reminder that compassion can arise in the most unexpected places and that life always finds a way, even in the face of the deepest cruelty. The children, including Sol and Estrella, grew up hearing this story, learning that true strength lies in the ability to love, protect, and connect with one another. Ilara, on a sunny and peaceful day, received a letter from her lawyer, Dr. Beatriz. It wasn't about legal matters, but a simple envelope containing a photo. In it, Sol and Estrella smiled openly, happy at a picnic with João, Miguel, and Mrs. Lucia, surrounded by lush nature. Ilara's heart ached, a bittersweet mix of pain for the past and immense gratitude for their present. They were well, loved, surrounded by a family that cherished them. It was all she could wish for them now. The image of the tiger, which once haunted her with guilt, was now a symbol of hope and redemption, that life, however much we try to control it, has its own way of flourishing and teaching us the deepest lessons. And so, the story of the Tiger Twins became a legacy, an eternal testament that kindness, justice, and love, in their purest forms, always prevail, weaving a future of hope and human connection that transcends time and adversity, inspiring everyone to seek the light, even in darkness.